sein bohem ne bideo you know sein bohem simunem de tsach heiten mir ein sag mach da spiel schön de flash de tsach da beyachab gefadame kinderlech alles muss man darf de tsach heiten mir ein sag da spiel schön de flash de tsach da beyachab gefadame kinderlech alles muss man darf.
Hello everyone, we're up to our second event of this unique year, and that is Bedikat Chametz. On this unique year, Bedikat Chametz will not take place on the night before Pesach, which is Friday night, but rather it will take place 2 nights before Pesach, Thursday night, April 10th. So, in this particular case, the halacha is very clear. That's when we do Bedika, and we treat it like as if we were doing it the night before Pesach. The Shulchan Aruch paskins it, and the Mishnah Berurah says you make a bracha and you say the Kol Chamira v'Chamira afterwards. Everything's the same. If for some reason you weren't home that night, then you do Bedika on Friday, Erev Shabbos, up until Shabbos. Try to make the house dark and use a flashlight or a candle, and you make a bracha. This is learned out from a halacha that if you didn't do a bedika, if you didn't do a check, and Pesach already finished, you still have to check your house to save yourself from the prohibition of chametz sha'avar alav ha-Pesach, chametz that went through Pesach owned by a Jew, that's prohibited to benefit from. In that case, says the Shulchan Aruch, lo yivarech, you should not make a bracha, which means any other bedika from the time of the bedika onwards, namely from our perspective, Thursday night, April 10th, and onwards, you do make a bracha, even if you do it during the day. But my question today is a simple one. How come we do it 2 nights in advance? How come we don't do the bedika on Friday night? It would have been a very interesting idea. We'd make kiddush, we'd have a meal, and then we do a bedikat chametz. Or opposite, we do the bedikat chametz before we eat, as we should every year. Why is it that we do it 2 nights in advance? So the Beit Yosef gives the answer, and I'll quote it from the Shulchan Aruch Harav, Rav Shneur Zalman Miladi, who says very simply, the reason you cannot do the bedika on Friday night is Asur letaltel et haner. You're not allowed to on Shabbos carry a candle from one place to another because it may get extinguished. That leads to a rabbinic prohibition of even picking it up, not moving it, simply because once you can't move it, it becomes muktzeh. And therefore, because it becomes muktzeh, basically the candle is stationary, you can't use it, and you can't do a proper check without a candle or a flashlight. But the Sdei Chametz, one of the greatest rabbis who wrote an encyclopedia on the Torah, in his amazing work, quotes the Avnei Shoam, who I never heard of, like many of the great rabbis he quotes in his work, who asks, why not? After all, asay doche lo ta'asay. Throughout the Torah, we have a rule that a positive commandment that comes to cahoots with a negative commandment, the positive commandment overrides the negative commandment. For example, a Kohen who goes to work in the temple has to wear the priestly garments. If one of them has shatnez, which you're not allowed to wear, prohibition, but he's obligated to work in the temple with these clothing, the halacha is you put on the clothing because asay doche lo ta'asay. So how come we can't say the mitzvah asay of tashpitu from the Torah, get rid of the chametz? Or if it's not the Torah prohibition, we'll take care of that in some other way. We're talking about the positive commandment to do a check, which is a rabbinic commandment that the rabbis told us to do. How come that doesn't override the prohibition of muktzeh, of carrying around the candle? This is the question of the Avnei Shoham. As a matter of fact, in another variation, the Magen Avraham quotes the Shlah, who comes along and says, you know what, let's not go so far. Let's do what many Jews do every Shabbos. Let's use a non-Jew. Every Jew will hire a non-Jew. They'll make a lot of money. On the night before Pesach, which will be Friday night, they'll carry the candle. So if it gets extinguished, they extinguished it. How come we can't even, at the very least, allow a non-Jew to help us do this mitzvah? Why do we do it 2 nights in advance? Either we'll use a non-Jew, or asay doche lo ta'asay, we'll carry the candle ourselves. 4 answers to this question. The Sdei Chametz comes along and says that at the end of the day, when you go ahead and say asay doche lo ta'asay, that's only if you have no brera. Namely, the Kohen has to wear those garments. There's no other garments. That's the way God said to make him with Chametz. But if there's a way to do it in a permissible way, then we don't invoke that law. And here we do have a way. Instead of doing it Friday night, we'll do it Thursday night. After all, you can check for Chametz 30 days before Pesach. You're obligated to, as a matter of fact. And therefore, there's no reason to invoke this rule. That's answer number one. Answer number two is, Aseh doche lo taseh is only if at the very moment that you're doing the positive commandment, you're fulfilling it at that moment. In this case, we're not. We're just checking for chametz. There's going to be a long way till we get rid of it. Only the next day we're going to burn it. Some of it's going to be left over for Shabbos, perhaps, to use. And ultimately, we'll flush it down the toilet on Shabbos morning or throw it in the garbage after throwing some bleach on it. Whatever it might be, we're not mekayem the mitzvah aseh at that very moment. We're not fulfilling the obligation, the mitzvah, and therefore you cannot invoke aseh doche lo ta'aseh, a positive commandment, going ahead and taking away a negative commandment. Answer number three. The Maharam Lublin and the Ran said it should have. As a matter of fact, it should have worked. But the Chachamim wanted to make a chizuk l'divreihem. They said muktzah is so important, we're going to strengthen it by saying that this law, aseh doche lo ta'aseh, will not apply to it. And finally, answer number four is of the Sdei Chametz himself. He comes along and says that aseh doche lo ta'aseh does not apply in a very chamor lo ta'aseh, a very stringent one. And extinguishing on Shabbos is high up there. If you extinguish on Shabbos, you're chayav karet, and worse. And therefore, it wouldn't work. So for these four reasons, at the end of the day, we do the Bedikat. Not the night before, but 2 nights before. We do not invoke aseh doche lo ta'aseh, and we do not use a non-Jew. And regarding that non-Jew issue, I just want to say that I think this is one of the many proofs that indeed the rule in your homes should be, we do not use non-Jews to do things on Shabbos for us that we can't do. We only use them in cases of great need, and there's rules and regulations when. Point positive. Our rabbi said, do the Bedikat 2 nights in advance, and do not use a non-Jew, simply because it's not that permissible.
So